Okay, so this is our first podcast on the integumentary system, also known as the skin. This is the skin man from the body's exhibit. This is what it looks like if you removed all your skin from the body, and as you can see, it is actually one of the body's largest organs. Okay, so some functions of the skin. Obviously, you know about its protective functions, protecting from foreign invaders, protection from the sun. It also plays a large role in regulating heat or regulating body temperature. The keratin in your skin serves as a waterproofing to keep water in as well as to keep water out of your body. It also is essential for making vitamin D, which you can also obtain from your diet, but if your diet doesn't consist of a lot of vitamin D, or at least historically it was good for making vitamin D in your skin. Excretion of certain substances, not something we think a whole lot about, but certain waste products can be excreted by the skin as well. And of course, the interaction with the nervous system, because the skin stores sensory receptors for touch and for pain and temperature. So why do we consider skin an organ? Well, first of all, an organ is any tissue or any group of tissues performing a particular function. So in this case, all those functions are performed not just by one tissue type, but by a multiple. The main organ in the integumentary system is the skin, but it's also known as the cutaneous membrane. You can kind of think of cuticles to help you remember that. So remember that a membrane is any thin layer of tissue covering a surface, lining a body cavity, or dividing a space or body organ. And there are three main types of epithelial membranes: mucous membranes, serous membranes, and cutaneous membranes. Mucous membranes are kind of what you learned about in your sex ed classes. They're the ones that are exposed to the outside body, like the anus and the mouth, the vagina. And it's here where we find goblet cells that secrete mucus, and that mucus helps to protect and trap foreign invaders particularly. Serous membranes are what we learned at the beginning of the year that divide body cavities. So you have serous membranes on top of an organ and lining each body cavity, like in the thoracic cavity, for example. And then the cutaneous membranes are the skin. The skin is special because it has the waterproofing, the keratinized layer of cells. So if you look at our skin specifically, it's divided up into two layers. The outermost layer, which you can see here, is the epidermis, and all of this region down here is the dermis. A lot of textbooks consider the subcutaneous layer to be part of the skin. That's kind of a technicality because it doesn't really fit anywhere else. The epidermis is made up of stratified squamous epithelium, which should look familiar to you. The dermis is mostly made up of dense irregular, which is not really apparent in this picture, but it also contains other accessory organs like muscles and glands. And the subdermal layer, it is also referred to, contains the adipose tissue. So here's your epidermis in a little more close detail. It is made up of keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. And at the very bottom of it, in this region here, you don't really notice it, but this is where you would have the basement membrane. And it's just a glue-like material that kind of binds the two different tissues together. Next, you have the stratum basale. Just think of base, or the bottom, and that's the bottom layer of cells. These are the cells that have really true nuclei. They have a lot of shape to them still. They're actively dividing because they are close to the blood vessels in the dermis. And it's here you could find melanocytes also. Now, ironically, I've never really noticed or been able to identify a melanocyte from a sample of tissues. It might look something like this, but as you see in a lot of the textbook pictures, they look a lot more branched than that. The stratum spinosum, you see these cells here start to look kind of spiny or not as round, and that's because they're producing keratin, and the junctions that hold the keratin together, called desmosomes, make them look spiny and branched. Up above that, there's about 3 to 5 layers of cells called the stratum granulosum, and if you see, they contain all these granules. These granules, I can't get a whole lot of information from your textbook about them, but they're basically there to help bind keratin together, because your skin is going to be kind of strip-like, and it's not going to look like cells by the time you get to the outermost layer. Stratum lucidum is only found in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. It's kind of the shiny layer here that you see, and it's special because the cells there are a little bit more clear. Again, you don't see nuclei. And the stratum corneum is this outermost layer. It's oftentimes called the horny layer. Those cells are dead, flattened, very scaly. They flake off very easily, so you don't see any nuclei, and they are obviously not dividing because they don't have a nuclei or organelles anymore. So those are the dead cells. They're very tightly packed together as well, and they are fully keratinized, meaning they're pretty much just keratin, and they're very hard, and that's what makes it waterproof. Alright, so there's the layers of the skin here. Here you can see the epidermis, you can see the stratum basale, the stratum spinosum. You don't really see a granulosum in this picture, but definitely you see the stratum corneum. Now, what are the things you find in the dermis? Well, certainly all these red things, even though it's a little, oh, I guess there's some blue over here, those represent your dermal blood vessels. Up near the skin, as they get tinier and tinier, this is what we would refer to as the capillaries. Those are going to be really important for regulating body temperature. If you want to cool off the body, you open up these vessels to allow blood to flow up into this region where it can lose and transfer its heat to the environment. If you are cold, you don't want to be sending your precious body heat to share with the environment. So you're going to close these vessels here, divert blood flow here temporarily, and keep it in your core. Alright, so those are the blood vessels. Another prominent feature, of course, is the hair, and down here the hair follicle. It's important to notice that the hair follicle is lined with epidermal cells, and that's why a lot of times you hear that your hair is made of skin. Down here at the hair root, there's a blood vessel here nourishing the growing hair, but again, it is essentially just epidermal cells that are growing together. We're not going to get into a whole lot of detail about hair growth. Bottom line is you see wrapped around every hair follicle receptors, which is why it hurts when you pull out a hair, and it's why you can feel your hairs move when a spider is crawling on your skin. Attached to the hair follicle, you will see this super awesome muscle, which normally is colored pink, but you can't have it all in every picture. This is called the erector pili muscle. It's what makes hair stand up. It traps a layer of heat, but in humans, because we don't have so much hair anymore, that doesn't really seem to serve a protective function. In other animals, it can help to keep them warm. We can also have emotional responses that cause goosebumps that we don't really understand. Over here you see a structure that is the same size as a hair follicle. Whoops. Go back. But it looks quite a bit different. It looks like a tube, and a coily tube down here. This is a sweat gland. Now you do have two types of sweat glands. One type of sweat gland you have from birth, and it is called an eccrine sweat gland. It's what normally produces sweat. You have another type of sweat gland that's usually more associated with hair follicles called the apocrine sweat glands. Those you develop at puberty, or they at least become active at puberty, and they tend to produce a different kind of smell because of the bacteria living near the hair follicle. They're also, the apocrine sweat glands are the ones that get activated during emotional stress, if you get sweaty when you're nervous and stuff. Let's see, these bulbs you see here are most likely representing light touch receptors. Some of them may be detecting hot and cold temperature receptors. That's not real clear in this picture. One thing that is typical of deep touch receptors is they tend to be a larger bulb, and you don't see those in this picture. I'll show you those in a second. Last thing you can see in this picture again is the adipose layer. Let's move on to something else. So here's showing heat and cold. Nothing really noticeable about the differences between those two. The one thing that's distinguishable here are the pain receptors. Now technically I would argue these pain receptors are drawn way too high in the epidermis, because as you know, you can sew a needle through your epidermis and not really feel pain. I think it's pretty reasonable to expect they might go into the stratum basale, but textbooks all draw them a little differently. So that's a pain receptor, and what is noticeable about it is it has a free nerve ending. It's not a big bulb like all the others. Here you can see the strong pressure or the deep pressure receptors located further down in the dermis. They always have that much bigger bulb to them. All right. Receptors to detect hair movement. That's a nice picture of that there. And of course these are all colored yellow to show the presence of nerves. This is just an additional picture showing melanocytes in the epidermis here, and we can talk more about those later. I'm not going to show you the animation. Alright, so one of the main things that you need to know about the skin is its temperature regulation. And we've already talked about vasoconstriction and vasodilation, so hopefully you can figure out what to put in those regions. When your body temperature rises above the 98 degrees or 37 degrees Celsius, your body's homeostatic mechanism is to get rid of that heat. So you produce most of that heat, usually through muscle action, but general metabolism produces heat as well. And that heat travels through your bloodstream because blood contains a lot of water, and therefore it can carry a lot of heat. And that blood, as it travels to the hypothalamus, or the control center of your brain, it's going to detect the change in temperature. Your main effector organs here are going to be the blood vessels in your dermis. So if you're too hot, blood vessels in the dermis will dilate and send more blood to the dermal capillaries. And in the rest of the body, they're going to constrict, because you can't just dilate your blood vessels or your blood pressure drops. So there's some constriction in the rest of your body. And additionally, your sweat glands will be activated, but that you already know. So we talked about this. Sorry, I probably should have had all these pop up, but this is my first round, and I gotta have this ready for tomorrow. So last but not least, this is something we did not get into much when we talked about temperature before, but this is important when we talk about hypothermia, because how you're losing heat to the environment can give you information about how quickly you're going to lose heat. So for example, radiation is just your body heat being transferred to the environment. I don't like this chair in this picture because I would consider sitting on a chair to be more like conduction, because you're in contact with the object. Now obviously your hand is going to cool down really quickly holding a snowball rather than just being in cold air when it's snowing. And that's because of conduction. You're losing heat, directly transferring it to that snowball. Probably also has a lot to do with the fact that a snowball is made of water, and so it's going to kind of suck your heat from you a little faster than other objects. Convection is if there's movement surrounding you. So for example, running through cold air cools you down, or having the windows down in the car, because that cold air is constantly being replaced by more cold air. So even as you're warming it, it's moving away from you. The same can be true of hot air as well. And evaporation is the one you guys know most about. When the liquids on your body evaporate into gases, that takes heat energy with it. Now the funny thing is it doesn't have to be boiling for it to turn to a gas. liquids turn into gas all the time. But on a really hot, humid day when the air is already filled and saturated with liquid,